What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is Neal, the CEO and founder of 2SP Sports. Joe and I originally crossed paths. I want to say it was back in the fall of 2022. He and his crew started experimenting a little bit with Flex Pro Grip, messed around. I think had a pretty fun off season, and after I think both parties probably forgot one another existed maybe for, for a year or so. Joe and I rekindled our relationship between FlexPro and 2SP this past off season. Joe was instrumental in implementing it with a couple of their athletes who it seemed like really had some pretty solid off seasons and have parlayed that into some decent starts to the year. Joe's call and how much he wants to divulge on names and everything like that. But I just figured I'd share how Joe and I have kind of crossed paths in the past and then rekindled a little bit of a working relationship here. But one thing I've been really impressed with in your career, Joe, is really your touch on so many different sports and the development of athletics and sports performance in what's kind of an untapped gold mine in youth athletics in Southeast Michigan. And that'll probably tease a little bit of some of what we're going to talk about today. But Joe, thanks so much for joining us. And with that, I'll kick it over to you for the bio.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me for sure. Like you said, Joe Neal, I'm CEO and founder of 2SB Sports here in Southeast Michigan. Kind of a very non-glorified career path, became very untraditional through the channels of SNC. I was a washed-up Division II baseball player. In Southeast Michigan, we have a considerable amount of youth athletics here that spans four large counties in our area. And back in 2000, our coach I went to Wayne State University here in Detroit. He was like, "Hey, you want to start working with some youth athletes and stuff?" And so actually never went through the process of S&C through kinesiology and or like exercise science. And I just started training athletes because it was really big part of I would consider the little bit of success that I had being relatively undersized, being somebody that wasn't traditionally very powerful, things like that, that really got me some extra years of playing sports in college and things like that. And even after that, I played some professional baseball as an undrafted free agent. Nothing to write home about, let me tell you. It was more in the realm of just enough to be there, not good enough to even close to get considered moving on. But I learned a lot about myself, and like if I would have had somebody, and at that time we didn't have a lot of people that were in this realm of helping improve performance. And so that I started working with kids, and my history was basically learning on the fly and putting together programs that people didn't have access to at that time. And that is literally my history of training. And 17 18 years later, we have facilities and we operate a considerable amount of square footage in the Metro Detroit area, working with thousands of kids a year throughout this great state that we're in, through mostly baseball and hockey. That's been our primary demographic. However, that doesn't mean we don't work with other sports. I think we just had the background in those particular two, and that's kind of held over almost 20 years of experience. So that's basically the history. I've collected some different certifications. I do a lot of consulting these days for athletes. I've probably for 15 years, I've worked with MLB and also NHL athletes every single year, probably managed $300 million worth of athletes each year between the two sports, and from their off season perspective. But over the years, I've done a lot of in season work, and then I would do quite a bit of speaking now through the NSCA and being a CSCS and things like that within their organization. So it's been something that I've been ramping up over the last couple of years, trying to get out on the circuit and things like that. So that's what I'm currently working on myself. Other than people doing their job great, and we got a great staff. So
Right away, I was going to ask you, having gone the non-traditional route, if you've gone back for any continuing education or certifications or anything like that. So are there specific certifications now that you mention them, or additional educational pursuits that you've undertaken that you have found super valuable? Or is it really just checking the box so you can be a name in the space?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that because I have this like really bad imposter syndrome when I go to like places with like Eric Cressy and like all these guys that have big name backgrounds and things like that, and I get really like um, trying to fit in, right? And the problem that I have is like I almost created a business before I had an education, which was a real big problem for me. As I considered going back to school really early in my career, nobody would allow me to internship at my own space because I already had the people that were there training with us. And really now we run internship programs and the people that we have running our internship programs are super high educated and super well, well off in the category, and they're providing our educational system and things like that. I had chosen a really even more traditional route. I had gone to early in my career as opposed to collecting certifications. I went right to the source. I had flown to several Premier League teams and looked at what they were doing with their youth development programs and their first teams. I had some access to some really unique people early in my career that I was training that allowed me to go to these places and see what was happening on the ground floor. And I had been to pretty much every top level facility in the United States and probably in Europe to see what these things, what was happening in the environment 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15. I spent probably 7 years just spending a week on end here and there, and places like Southampton and Arsenal and Manchester City, Manchester United, those type of places that I was going to, that I was spending weeks on time at, just looking at what they were doing for the youth development. At the time, Premier League soccer was really in its own category as far as like how they were developing athletes and recovery systems and things of that nature, far more in advance than any 10, 12 years ago, than any Major League Baseball team or any large scale sport that was in the United States. So I felt that was a good opportunity for me. And then, I was exploring a lot of places domestically also that were far and ahead above where I thought I was at that point. And that's really how I got my education really, really fast, because I always felt like because I didn't have that kinesiology degree and things like that, I needed to expedite that process for me as fast as possible, which made, I think, me a really unique person in the environment, because I was always really on the outside looking in, trying to find any way I could to help athletes. And that's what maybe made all this opportunity possible over time. So
Well, before we get into specifics on maybe what you pulled from some of those places, because I am very interested in what you've pulled and been able to apply from high-level soccer camps into
yeah.
the baseball and hockey world, I can begin to make some connects, but of course, I need to hear from the horse's mouth. However, before we get into that, there is something that I want to address, and people always say it's not what you know, it's who you know. I tend to think in a place where constant learning is so important, I would flip that on its head a little bit. I think who you know lets you know what you need to know. And it sounds like you were kind of able to leverage these relationships so you could find out or get boots on the ground and figure out what you actually need to know, or at least look under the hood and make some connections for yourself. So, how were you able to find these connections, leverage these connections? Because I assume to an extent this is a closed mouths don't get fed situation. Like you kind of needed to put yourself out there and say, hey, can I come by? I can't imagine you just stole someone's badge, snuck onto a practice
Yeah.
facility and just started watching. But I also don't think all of those things are open. So can you just divulge a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting because I had been known in the area for my background in baseball and somebody that had done fairly well from a playing perspective. And I got involved with a hockey team that ironically had Kirk Gibson's son on it, Cam Gibson. Although he wasn't the end up being a driver, by the way, he was an elite hockey player also, as well as he was at baseball. But the coach of that team was Igor Larionov. His son was on that team, and so Igor, obviously being part of the Russian Five with the Red Wings, was really a person that inspired me to really start looking deeper into athletic development, as he kind of, we'll call it, liked my, we'll call methods of training at that point, and they were They were things that started out as what they worked for me as somebody who was, maybe undersized, underpowered, pretty much every infrastructure quality that needed to happen, I needed as a player. And so he really inspired me to kind of look a little bit deeper and look for the whys and the whats and the hows of what people were doing. He was well known in Russia and Europe and things like that. Made a couple calls, and he got me a couple opportunities to travel. And at the time, he was an agent for hockey. And so he had a lot of upcoming Russian talent that he would bring over from Russia to the United States to train. And then I started getting, I ended up training the 1-1 overall pick for the 2012 draft. His name was Neal for a couple of years. And he had set at that time every basically VO2 record and every category you could in the draft. And he had spent a considerable amount of time under, I guess, my tutelage at the time, as far as training and preparing for that particular draft. And so Igor had taken a good liking to that and made some more opportunities available to start traveling to these different places in the world. We had gone through Moscow, we had gone through a couple other areas in there and really looked at, some of these, I guess, historical inputs, from a perspective of plyometrics and eccentric training and Olympic lifting and all these different methodologies that everybody seems to find new these days, but they're not. They've been there for a very long time. And, this is 15, 20 years ago now. And that's really what kind of catapulted some of the opportunities. Then the lockout came in the NHL draft, and it was kind of like this baseball, hockey timeline that I had. And then lockout came, and then I started getting a lot of baseball guys after that. Got back into professional sports not back into, but then started getting into professional, the MLB side of baseball, and started to be able to apply both what we've learned from a hockey perspective and what I already knew from some of the baseball to, then bringing in new methodology and things like that for baseball. And then this tech boom has happened around that period of time for baseball, and we started really adopting a lot of these different things that became available. Because I pre-existed a lot of the tech that was there. I was training without force plates. I was training without dynamometers. I was training without force frames and all these different things that we now have available to us. And we were making a difference then. So I think we've had that conversation before where it was like, we were having good success without any of this technology. Now everybody relies on it, which I think is a really interesting thing for sports moving forward. But there are a lot of things that we input now that I'm like, man, without being able to objectively measure these things, it would be really hard to push some of it forward. So,
yeah, I even remembered that conversation specifically back from the fall of 2022 when you said, I've been doing this thing for a long time, man. I've trained a lot of athletes. I've tried basically every single thing under the sun. What makes Flex Pro any different? And thankfully, you saw the light that we tried to produce, and it made me very happy. Obviously, you've had some success with it. Not trying to go that route with the conversation now,
but we, because I've been an outsider, I've been willing to try to adapt to like some things that we've seen in people. I get inundated with technology on a regular basis. It just every day there's something new that people tell me they can measure, and so the interesting part of the Flex Pro scenario for us was like everybody has their grip strength models and what they're doing for the lower arm or forearm improvement. And I was just never a true buyer on being an ex-player going, okay, farmer's walks are everything that's going, or pinch grip, type stuff is everything that's going to improve my throwing ability. And we needed something that was a more direct correlation between what we were implementing in the weight room and what the true outcome we wanted to have for that particular player, we'll call it. So we'll do that for any, whether that's baseball, and, obviously Flex Pro is a little bit more specifically designed for baseball, but it has integration models for other sports too, I think, as we look at the other ones that I accommodate on a regular basis too. So
yeah, we're starting to get into that here and there. We've got a hockey coach over in Switzerland. Thankfully, he was exposed to it because his son is a baseball player over in Switzerland. Just became obsessed with getting better at pitching, and because this guy's a hockey coach and knows what it takes, and just as well as anyone, the development system in hockey, you constantly have to be making cut after cut after cut as you age up in the sport. So he wants his son to be as prepared as possible in baseball. Although he might be able to quickly rise in the ranks in Switzerland, he might not be able to quickly rise in the ranks in the United States. Thus, the dad is trying to bring everything he can in developmentally, and now the dad is thinking like, this is probably pretty neat. I wonder if there's some correlations here between rate of force development and the fingers in a guy's ability to, I don't know, handle a puck or have certain stick skills. I mean, this goes well beyond me. My hockey experience sticks to rollerblades in the driveway and just
Yeah,
ripping tennis balls at my garage door. That
yeah,
that was my hockey experience. And then I found out I was going to need to quit basketball if I wanted to play hockey, and I just decided to stick with basketball. Maybe that wasn't the best call as a 5'11" kid, but my dad played collegiately, so
yeah.
I don't know. I thought maybe there was a path there to be a two-sport athlete with baseball and basketball. Lo and behold, there wasn't. But that's a story for another day. But no, you're 100% right. Like we got our start in baseball. There's no question it's built out specifically for throwers at this time, whether it's baseball, softball, even javelin. But I mean, we are starting to explore the other realms. We have a handful of quarterbacks that have used it, and some of that comes from the research and the feedback that we get from people like you who are looking to use a tool creatively across all the athletes that come in. And before we get too far away from, I think, part two of the question that I was trying to get to earlier, you mentioned going to all these soccer complexes or these
Yeah.
soccer facilities. So what was it that you were able to pull from, or maybe I should say football, because you went across the pond to go
Yeah.
look at all this stuff. But when you were going to look at these high class soccer football clubs, what was it that you were able to pull and bring back for baseball and hockey athletes in the United States?
Well, for us, we tend to do a lot of throwing development now within my everyday scope through pitchers and things like that. In our area, we do have some very talented arms, but at the time earlier in my career, we were working with a lot of position players. So my biggest chases was developing linear speed quality and what they were doing from a perspective of speed improvement, which over time I have really kind of looked at as a quality that kind of dictates a little bit of overall ability to throw harder too. I tend to see guys that run faster are able to throw harder, which is really interesting thing. And I only have things that are more in the anecdotal range where it's like, okay, well, that is what I've seen over my scope of 20 years or 18 years of training athletes, that if you move faster, you might be able to throw harder. So my biggest chase in short was more linear speed development and what they were doing and how they were developing the lower body, which interestingly enough, within the scope of baseball over here, there's so much applied to the shoulder to the hand as opposed to maybe the torso down. And that's something that we really brought back. And people don't define soccer or football in this case as a rotational sport, but the amount of rotational work that needs to be done for soccer athletes is something that I've really applied to baseball and then really hockey also, because everything is happening rotationally with these athletes. They're kicking, and that's a rotational, like a kicker for football is as rotational as a baseball player because of how their hips have to work and how their torso has to stabilize and things like that. So those are the things that we severely brought back and applied to baseball on a regular basis. The recovery modalities that they were doing, the -3, -2, -1, plus a 0 day, +1, +2, +3 on recovery is something that I implement with our starting pitchers regularly now. More on the -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. So game day for guys that are on 5-day rotation. So those recovery procedures and things are because they were at the time were very advanced and honestly, they probably still are ahead of the curve in professional sports, but how they're doing game day to game day, those are things that we're applying to our athletes on a regular basis. So hugely beneficial to just see that scope, see it from a different lens, and then try to come back and go, okay, how can that benefit our players here?
I know you said it's mostly anecdotal at this point. If I had to hypothesize, I would guess you're seeing a lot of intrapersonal improvements. So if you take you as a thrower, we get you to run faster, you likely can express greater force, thus throw harder, as opposed to just looking across the board at all these athletes' sprint speeds and just be able to toss a simple one-to-one correlation of like, oh, this guy runs the fastest, so he'll throw the hardest. I
Yeah.
assume a lot of it's if you can get an individual to express force better in whichever capacity that is, whether it is lower body, it's jumping, sprinting, acceleration, stopping force, braking force. I assume it's just because their ability to express force improved, they likely can express that force better through the hand and out through the ball.
Yeah, yeah. So globally, they're moving faster, and whether a guy runs a 5.5 40 and he improves, like that speed expression is going to likely improve their ability to throw the ball faster. Which is now, I'm not saying that we're sprinting guys every day, but I do think that sprinting is something that should be in a quality program, and we use those type of things for our throwing athletes on a regular basis. And again, something that I think isn't all that magnified by all the let's call it velocity programs that are out there. I don't think, if I can say it, like Tread and Driveline are known for their sprinting programs that they have, but for me and how I've developed programming for my throwing athletes, it is always some sort of sprint mechanism that's worked into the programming model for sure. As long as they're healthy enough to sprint, they are definitely sprinting in the models that I'm creating currently.
I think that is something that I'm thankful to have now seen kind of across the board in the industry, going back to treating baseball players and throwers specifically as more generalized athletes, treating them as individuals who need to be able to express force in a lot of ways. And if we can build the most robust athlete possible who can sprint and can jump and can rotate and can throw, they are ultimately going to be able to see better outputs in their specific skill when it comes time to express that skill. Whereas 5 years ago, maybe was the peak of we need to individualize and specialize in every single thing we do, which was we need to express force at the shoulder and we need to be able to rotate really freaking hard. So everything we were seeing was radar gunning med balls constantly, which I still think is a valuable exercise. I'm not saying it isn't, but 5, maybe 10 years ago is when we were seeing of like, oh, well, the way we can make this exercise better is by putting a glove on this player's hand while they're performing the exercise.
It's being in this industry as long as I mean, I remember going back to like when, you know, athletes were too lordotic and we had to add all the corrective modeling for anterior core strength because guys were having too much
The anterior pelvic tilt.
yeah, there was too much of that, and so then it became like all corrective exercise, and then it was all lateral stability, and that, you know, we seem to find in this industry, we seem to find all these like we skew the models one way, and then we find out we got to come back, and we always end up in the middle in some capacity.
Herd mentality for sure.
Yeah, and I'm now you know, you say like med balls, and was like how much high speed velocity can you create during your rotation modeling now or your programming, and now I think there's going to be a combination of how much you can rotate and how fast you should rotate, and really are we delaying rotation as much as we can, and then bringing it all at once, and these guys now with that, it's you're seeing this drop and drive modeling and more hinging, and now we're finding that there's kind of two different types of throwers: a guy that's got a hip hinge a little bit, and then there's these guys that have to go up and create momentum down, and they follow the slope of the mound, and we have to develop our programming based on the athlete that is in front of us. And I think there's too much of this profiling. These young kids are all trying to follow one different scope of like what they see successfully done. Paul Skeens does this, or Scooble does this, and we got to do that. And really, maybe that doesn't work for how they move. We've had a considerable amount of pitchers that are now these momentum pitchers that are kind of up to down, and they work very differently than some of these hip hinge style pitching that I think everybody is chasing. And I got to coil my hip just enough. And, you know, honestly, like I'm so over all the these different models. I really, what I want to see is I want to see people start from the ground up and work more foundationally. Everybody, I got 12-year-olds throwing weighted balls and they're patterning their throwing, and they don't do enough. You want to get off on a tangent. These young athletes, my sons play 10, 11, and 12 years old, and they don't play enough catch. Just get out there and play catch and develop an arm path. And we're trying to push these like arm modeling systems early, and their coaches are out there with 7, 8 ounce baseballs that are thrown into a wall. And I don't see it. The best players that I deal with, they're like, man, what happened to playing catch? Like early in young development and things. They didn't go through these programs. I remember Verlander, because obviously he's a Tiger, and he's a Tiger for life, by the way.
Doesn't matter who else he plays for, Tiger for life.
Yeah, he's always going to be a Tiger here. And he was back, and he was doing an interview a couple months ago, and it's just like, I played catch early in my career, and I didn't throw 95 when I was a sophomore in high school. He didn't, because we're the same age. We actually went to the same showcase back early. I was a terrible baseball player. He wasn't. But he did not throw that hard when he was that young, and then it kind of developed over time. And those are the things that I feel like get off tangent, because you see it on TV, and these guys are such data points, and like they're modeling early in their career wasn't what you see today, and it's this buildup over time. And even the best players that we have in our stable now it's the same way. They've gotten better as Major League Baseball players. They didn't start like that. So that's it's a very big thing for me, is the foundational stuff I think is really skipped over. That's what we're trying to implement early.
I think foundational is really the perfect word to describe it. Earlier you said start from the ground up, and I think although that is specific for the way to look at throwing or help an athlete develop, or that's probably how you use it there, I really think that goes across the industry when it comes to athletic development. And my take when it comes to developing throwers, however you think the right way to do it, fine by me, sure. But what you cannot convince me of, no matter what, is that the way you throw a baseball when you're 10 is going to be the same way you throw it when you're 12, and that's going to be the same you throw it when you're 15, 18, 24, 32, if you're so fortunate to play that long. And if that's the case, why are we trying to ingrain a specific pattern at such a young age when, let's face it, that is not how athleticism is expressed ever. It changes on every single throw or in every single action. So why not create, again, the word I used earlier, the most robust system possible for an athlete? And whether that's the most robust training or the most robust throwing program, I don't care how it gets written. But I'm a huge proponent that we need to expose athletes to as many different things as possible. And what's kind of funny is a great way to do that is through the simplicity of catch, or going and, I mean, we called it butts up. I mean, basically wall ball. We did it for 35 minutes during a recess session. We would just go grab a tennis ball and chuck it at the wall as hard as we could and try to hit our friends in the back as they ran at the wall. And then if they got out enough times, we threw it at their asses, hence butts up. But what that forced is throwing sidearm and throwing on the run and jump throwing and doing all the things which thankfully are starting to trickle their way back in. But because of the specificity that we talked about earlier, everything in our industry became so focused on patterning and perfection rather than exposure. And I really think sometimes perfection can be the enemy of exposure, because we're chasing one desired result that frankly is never going to come. And it sounds like that is a battle that you are fighting daily.
Yeah, I mean, even where we're at, the competition to move into high level collegiate play is I mean, it's like everywhere else. Everybody wants to make it to Division I school and things like that. And a lot of these players now that are maybe not getting getting the accolades of those higher level Power Four teams are actually the ones that sometimes make it the farthest, because they have to reinvent themselves. And they didn't throw as hard early, but they figured out, they stayed in the game long enough that they were able to adjust their modeling and adjust their throwing potential over time and improve. And they continue to, my collegiate coach from Wayne, he was like, you just got to continue to kind of improve over time. And instead of having these huge spikes where there didn't seemingly be a space to move to if you have this big spike. And these younger kids, these 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds, and they're so enamored by trying to throw 80 or 82 or 83 and get on pace to throw 95 when they're a senior in high school. And it just doesn't seem like they have the bandwidth and really durability to sustain these things over time. My big focus has been to provide the foundation that seems to get passed over early in that early those early years, trying to improve to that so fast. If we can create the foundation, they're going to have that better peak, and they're going to be able to improve over a longer period of time. And if they get there too early, I mean, the blowout scenario is huge, and the injury setback scenario is huge, especially around us in this area, because they're trying to exceed that ability too quickly, and they're not ready for it. They're overpowered, under infrastructured, as we'll say a lot in this area, and that could be full body, that could be a partial piece of their body that's not ready to get to that point. But to me, if we can build an athlete that is globally strong, somebody that can be durable, and somebody that can accept forces, then they have a better chance to throw harder and go further in their careers. So that's our focus, especially because our business deals with those developmental ages, 12 to 18 years old. And a lot of reasons why I think we have such a very good population around us is a lot of these athletes are homegrown. It's not like people that were in Florida move up to Michigan. I mean, we have a large population because we have a lot of good places like ours, not just us, but we have a lot of good places up here that are exposing these athletes to the right stuff and creating long career paths for these athletes who end up living here and creating families and staying up here, and it creates that culture around us. So I think it's a big part of the development in our area.
Even though you said in your local area, you're dealing with athletes trying to set a proper infrastructure or construct the proper infrastructure for 12 to 18-year-olds, it's not just limited to those ages. I know of at least 2 injuries that I've had conversations either with their camps or with these individuals from the MLB or high-level professional baseball this offseason that, quite frankly, they likely got hurt because they gained 4 miles per hour in the offseason. And we all want to throw harder because throwing harder is ultimately the gateway or the amazing glass door, sliding door that will open up these new opportunities for us in the sport. I am not naive to that. Trust me, I get it. The harder you throw, the more opportunities that you have as an individual in this game. However, the harder you throw, the more inherent risk you have because your body now has new torques and new forces that it has to deal with. So every incremental gain that you make, you also need to be able to handle it. And it sounds like it has really come through in what you've tried to express is that to an extent, we don't want to delay development, but if we can constantly, I guess, scale at a safe pace, we are going to be better off in the long run.
I mean, what is the average mile per hour gone up in the major leagues over the last couple of years? What was it, like 93.3 a couple of years ago? Now it's like 95.1 or something like that.
Yeah, the most insane stat imaginable is the average right-handed starter in 2026 is throwing a 95.2 mile an hour fastball. I just talked about this on a podcast maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. That means the single most stock pitcher you could ever imagine is throwing 95.2 miles per hour. If you threw 95.2 miles per hour, I graduated high school in 2012. I graduated college in 2016. Even if we go to 2016, so my last possible draft year, if you sat the average 95.2 miles per hour, without a doubt, you are the consensus #1 overall pick. You are getting millions tossed at you, and you are a no doubt break the bank on it, surefire #1 overall selection, being touted as a future Hall of Famer. And now you were the single most stock pitcher imaginable.
It is really interesting because last year we had a couple pitchers that improved I think we went up point 0.7 in average velo over the four seam fastball. I was getting calls on a regular basis asking us what we did for our velo program. And to me, like, we don't particularly run any velo particular programs per se where we're doing weighted vol or implementation, things like that. I am a strength coach at his core, and we're just trying to improve how the body moves and the moments in which it kind of moves through. So I only come at it from that perspective. And one of our guys' average fastballs went from 95.8 to like 96.4 or something like that on the year, and was that point 6 plus. And we're getting those type of calls, and these people that are exceeding 2, 3, 4 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden they're so susceptible to blowout at that point, right? And you look at it and you go, okay, what is a responsible improvement over a season, and the number of throws that they're going to make? If you're a starter and you're doing 30 plus starts, I mean, you could have 2,500 pitches in a year. And so to have a 4+ mile per hour improvement over 2,500 or 26 or 2,700 pitches in the season, not to mention the number of throws that are support throws for that, right? So at the point at which you're warming up and you're going through your bullpens, if you do a bullpen between starts and things like that, I mean, the number of throws could exceed 4,000 or 5,000 in a season. You don't understand how those just add up. You're just counting the number that are in particular between the lines during an officiated event, right? And then if you're trying to add throws to that, or if you're burning bullets to achieve that 4 miles an hour, that's a question in itself. So if I'm doing weighted ball programs and things like that, and I'm sounding like I'm super anti weighted balls, which I'm not, I just think that they have to be used at the appropriate time for the appropriate reason at the appropriate moment. That's a whole other thing. Those are throws that are getting burned. The arm can only do so much. And so I remember going back to a guy, Justin Ornduff, who I've talked to a number of years since the beginning of his career. And we were talking about the number of throws or number of innings that are recorded before average blowout, right? And like at the time, it was like 1,700 innings. Now guys aren't lasting. There's data that's going out there that's, if you get past 350 innings in the major leagues, you will likely last a certain period of time after that. But if you don't last 350 innings before you have some sort of setback, then your career might not exceed a certain number of years. So we have to consider how many throws we got to make to actually achieve that mile per hour. And if it's is the juice worth the squeeze at that point to escalate 2-3 miles an hour for a shorter career? Yeah, these guys are data points in themselves too, right? Like guys that are throwing above 95. I don't think people are considering how many people that maybe be able to throw that, but actually stay with it for a certain period of time. Going back to my Verlander, I mean, how many years through 15 years or 17 years before he actually ended up damaging himself? Is that just him being him? Yeah, it's like he was just resilient to being able to throw that long, that hard. I don't know if there's a program that we could ever design that would be able to mimic that longevity at that velo. So
you bring up such an interesting case, and I wish there was a way to retroactively go back and study every single thing these guys have ever done. The ones like Justin Verlander, who really have had clean careers, versus another guy, Yu Darvish, who has been, I don't want to say injury plagued, but he's dealt with a fair share of things. And you can look at the way he throws, and there's probably a handful of people that would say he looks impeccable. Like I would never, ever even consider changing a thing. And you can look at the way he takes care of his body very similarly. Like who's going to make an adjustment of what he does, the way he can move, how pliable he is, how he can control force in different ranges. But he's a guy that has had multiple elbow surgeries. He's missed a ton of time. Justin Verlander, I know his shoulder has barked on him once, maybe twice, but later in his career. I don't know, like who's to say one of them did it right and one of them did it wrong? Like these are guys that are uber talented that can express force with the best of them. I wish I wish there was a way that we could go back and just try to go through it with a fine tooth comb.
I'm just not convinced anybody has figured out that piece of the puzzle. Somebody that throws hard, that can withstand the longevity of a career. It is extremely hard to be a MLB pitcher. It doesn't matter. Even if you throw 95, these guys are so good at adapting to that velo, right? Several of the pitchers that I've dealt with in the big leagues who had early success have significantly changed their pitch arsenal to adjust and accommodate the hitters responding to that original pitch arsenal that was successful. So even if their resilience has been good, their forces are going to have to change depending on how they grip the ball and what they're trying to do and what their usage is over time. And they're changing their usage based on their pitch choice and those change stresses. And so I feel like we're always accommodating what the previous year held for that particular athlete. So you can package up as many Job's drills and pitcher's tens you want to put together, but there is not a method that has been proven that is going to carry these guys that magically find 4 miles an hour for 10 years. There just isn't. And I think guys like me in the private sector, we're kind of looking at a lot of the options that they have and trying to really diagnose what their season the stress that their season provides, and then reacting to it over time. And that's where I found tools like, I'm not trying to pump the whole Flex Pro tool itself, but like there are tools that we've implemented that I think have started to help accommodate some of these type of things. So I'm personally biased to Hawk and Dynamic with their usage, right? And we're using their true strength devices for something that I found really useful for our pitchers that I think have seen a lot of success, particularly in lower bodies. We use a lot of lower body AD and abduction type tests to let us know whether or not we feel like the lower body is adequately contributing to their ability to throw hard, which is something that I don't feel like people are looking at. They're like, okay, what's their range of motion? How much IR, ER do they have in a particular motion? Things like that. Or strength in let's say supine 90-90. I feel like these pitchers are getting into such retraction and external rotation that might not even be a super useful metric anymore, because you see them get so deep into retraction and then they get so deep into layback. Maybe we're not even looking at the right location of the test in that particular scenario. I guess I'm explaining that kind of weird, but they're getting in this inside of the game. They're getting into such bigger degrees of bigger angles that they're not the same as the testing that we're providing, or in that objective tests that we're doing in, let's call it physical therapy, or, not even physical therapy,
or your basic readiness
basic
assessment.
assessment. Yeah.
I'm totally
Basic
with you.
assessment,
I'm totally
right?
with you.
So it's like, and then they get hurt, and you wonder why. It's like, are they strong in the angle that they actually achieve, because they are now fully torqued within their delivery, and they're in some sort of rotation and external rotation layback at the same time. And then they try to bring it all forward. And to be honest with you, I don't think that these pitchers, they train heavy enough either. That's a whole nother thing over time, because they always want to feel good, with throwing motion. So then does that force the force that they're able to achieve or need to be able to throw that hard over time really degrade once they get fatigued, because they don't have enough strength to carry them over, let's say, 80 to 110 pitches in a game.
And do you think that specific take, training hard enough, do you think that is year-round, off-season, in-season? I'm very curious. Yeah, because and then I want to get into some monitoring stuff, because you provided the perfect segue for the next topic that I really wanted to get into. So yeah, do you think guys are going hard enough year-round, or is it a seasonal thing that they kind of get scared of?
I think that with this is gonna sound like I'm anti league, but depending on the rotation, right? 5 days, are there going to be a 6th day in there occasionally? I think all that's going to going to play week to week, right? So if you're coming back on 4 days, that's going to be a thing. 4-day rest, 5-day rest. I think that the buildup during preseason needs to be a little bit more. Personally, 25 pitches in the first outing, 35 pitches in the second outing. They get to 65 in the last outing, and maybe they're on a backfield, and that's not enough stimulus from an intent standpoint. So I'm talking more skill specific at that point. But then they go into season and all of a sudden they hit 80 to 100 pitches, and that's not enough on ramp. I think they should be giving them a little bit more on ramp as far as numbers of pitches. But at the same time, how do you mix in the strength and intensity within that? I think that needs to be ramped up also earlier in the preseason. They're not off season is an interesting thing, because if an athlete's trying to make it and stay there, their mindset is a lot different than somebody that's there and being paid. Those guys that tend to be younger tend to be stronger and more fatigue resilient, whereas guys that are in the league are probably wanting to feel a little bit better, and they don't maybe do as much once they make it. And so to me, this idea of like microdosing within the season becomes more of a thing. I'm not trying to do as much in a particular day, but I'm doing things more regularly. And I think a lot of pitchers are moving towards that modeling, as opposed to taking one day and having like a super high intensity day during the season, and then they're sore for a couple of days after. It seems like the modeling for the pitcher now is a lot more, I don't want to be sore right anytime. And so as I look at in-season program, I'm trying to find ways to not create much soreness and still have good strength feedback. So we're doing high intensity days, pretty low volume, let's say. And so the pitchers that I've been working with and over time, we've been going more towards that. But I want them doing more longer, deeper into the season, because as the back half of the season comes, you start to see some velo dips and my arm's a little bit sore. And something that hit me early in my career is pain sometimes can be a result of strength loss, right? So like my question would become does injury or setback start to come when strength is lost? And that doesn't necessarily mean like gross strength or like, can I bench press 250 pounds? That's not what I'm talking about. Just generally speaking, once I lose some of that ability, do those things start to creep in? And I would argue that is the case over a long period of time. And again, an MLB season is absolutely grueling when you factor in all the travel and nights in, nights out, late nights. Their sleep is deprived in some cases, right? And some guys don't know how to bring it down. So there's a lot of factors that I think that people don't consider. They think it's a cushy life and being on an airplane is awesome, but when you're in a pressurized tube for 10 hours and then you got to get off the plane and you don't have any sleep and you got to go out there and perform. I mean, that's something that's very difficult, right? And that in itself degrades strength and degrades recovery over time. So, I mean, these are all factors that I'm trying to figure out on a regular basis. How do we improve? I don't know if that answers the question, but those are the thoughts that come to my head when we're talking about where can we place those strength bouts in a season that doesn't have any days off.
Mm-hmm. The natural next question is, when you are directly involved with monitoring for a player, what are things you are looking at? So the guys that you do have hands-on touches with during the year or regular calls, how are you guys structuring in-season monitoring?
Well, I mean, typically we'll talk about, the first thing is like, how are you feeling on a day-to-day basis? Are you feeling run down? Did you get enough sleep? What is your hydration like? And I'm not on the nutritional side that often, but it is something to think about. Are they getting enough recovery sleep? Most of the guys that I talk to in season are pitchers at this point. With it, the position players they don't seem to be as train wrecked after an outing, right? I think their inputs are a little bit more consistent, so they don't feel as run down after a single bout like the pitchers that I deal with. So from the pitching perspective, the next day is, how's the shoulder feel? How's the back feel? Kind of those spots that you would think that would be sore. And then what are we looking at this week? How many days off are we going to have? Is there going to be an extra day off? Are we going to use those extra days off to input strength out. And it's really going to go off a feel on a regular basis, because if the athlete isn't feeling about it, to try to stuff it into me is really hard. We can get them to grind it through, but we're going to pay for that on the back end of the season. So if we get good recovery and they're feeling better, I tend to have the more ability to slip things in that are going to pay off on the, at the end of the season well. And I would tell you, I'm talking into the playoffs, too. So that's when it really gets grindy for some of these guys, and they don't want to do anything. So any inputs that we can have right now are really going to significantly pay off better at the end of the season, and really try and just uphold as much strength and hold on to as much strength as we can now is going to be a benefit later.
Now, here's a specific question that probably applies to, I don't know, maybe a grand total of like 6 listeners of the podcast. But when guys are spending that much time on an airplane, what do you encourage them to do to downregulate? For me, personally, I can tell you I don't like flying. It freaks me out. It doesn't matter how much I fly. I continue to operate in this fight or flight state. Thus, when I land, I am exhausted. It doesn't matter. I've taken a lot of plane trips in my life. I'm fortunate to say that. I understand it. However, it wrecks me emotionally, mentally, and physically. I can't imagine I am the only one in that boat. So please, even if this is personal for me, I'd love to have any advice you can offer.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a deep thing. And we've toyed with a lot of different ways to cope with a pressurized tube that you're going to be in for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, right? The number one thing I would want my athlete to do, or somebody that was getting on a plane, would be hydrate really well. Try not to hit that many carbs before you get on the plane hours in advance, because when you do that, you tend to inflame the body. That pressurization kind of really messes with your internal workings, and that becomes an issue. And the last thing I want guys to do is drink on a plane, which in baseball, that's kind of a common thing to do when you're on the plane, whether that be a glass of wine or a beer or something like that to kind of wind down. But these guys want to get into recovery mode. That is not the way to do it. I don't exactly know what happens on some of these planes, but like that's and try to not eat a ton of food while they're on them. Even though sometimes that's just not the case. They get done with the game, they go straight to the airport, and then they're flying out, and that's just not an option. And one of the things that I don't think the normal person understands about high level athletics is nothing that a Major League Baseball player or an NHL player or anything has anything to do with them being a well functioning human being. Like nothing. A high performance athlete has high performance problems. They just have found a way to cope with these things, whether that be get on the plane and operate with only 4 hours sleep, or, drink like they just deal with it better than a lot of people that you see. Giancarlo Stanton is a statue of a human being. If a regular person operated like he does, the way that he keeps muscle on his body, or like some of these guys that look like statues, is crazy to me, because the normal human being would just disintegrate with the type of travel and how they have to turn themselves on. I mean, when I was a player, we used to have a coffee pot in the dugout to keep us awake, because at 7:05 start, I mean, we were still flying until 2 a.m. in the morning. So it was. I don't think people are trying to drink that much caffeine or whatever they do to be awake at the times that they have to be. Those are problems that the normal person does not understand, that they have to deal with, being extraordinarily awake and alert to get the best hitters out in the world. It's mind-blowing to me how they do it.
And then, of course, shut it off so then they can recover and hopefully do it.
Yeah, and then
4 or
2
5 days
a.m.
later
comes around and you're like, okay, I need to get
Craziest
some
thing
sleep now.
imaginable.
And I got to do it again in 5 days.
Right. And then you wonder why guys develop dependencies on different substances and things like that. It is an unfortunate cycle, and it's the downside, the less talked about side of professional athletics. And we don't need to open up that that door too much. I'm sure you've seen it and probably had to put your arm around a guy here and there to help
I,
them through some of those times.
you're talking to a person that has seen people from not well known to absolutely well. The majority of people that I've come across, I've never gotten the first round pick delivered to my lap. I've always started at home plate and went all the way around the bases. Somebody that has been given, a first round pick and started to work with them. So I've seen these guys kind of work through the process of becoming well known. And, you're talking to somebody that totally believes that these people are paid every dollar they should, because nobody sees the back hours that they put in. Nobody sees the turmoil and the years of trying to grind it out that they've endured to now be on the stage where they're paid exponential dollars. But they didn't see when they were making, before the new players agreement, when they were making $400 a month in the minor leagues, taking out loans on their credit cards to pay for food and doing all that. So I find professional sports extremely grueling, and when these athletes are done, you just hope they continue to become healthier individuals over time because of the damage that they've done to their bodies and the endurance that they've had to go through. So,
Yeah. Wow. This little part of the conversation I think has been really illuminating. It's been a lot of fun for me, and it's why I said I like to just kind of see where conversations take us.
yeah.
So I appreciate you going down that road. There's a couple things we still haven't spent too much time on. So before I do let you go, I'd love to at least sprinkle those in. And one of which is the hockey side of things. We've mentioned it a few times. You're still training a good bit of hockey players, and my daughter's trying to make an appearance on the podcast in the background vocally. Hopefully, my mic is pretty good and keeps her muted. Usually, it does. We shall see. What kind of crossovers or kind of comparisons have you been able to make in your hockey athletes versus your baseball athletes? Again, I don't know how much other people are going to really gain from this other than, wow, that's really cool.
I actually think that the hockey guys have benefited from baseball background quite a bit for me. I actually got into the major part of my hockey, we'll call it success or relationships, because of the background I had or gained from treating shoulders. The injuries themselves in hockey are really relatable. We have a ton of rotator cuff injuries. We have a ton of, we'll call it like scapular problems in hockey.
Interesting.
Their forward fold during their skating position. But the majority of those injuries come from a collision base, not so much as a movement profile, like a baseball player getting overhead. The rotator cuffs come from getting banged into the boards. But really, at the end of the day, a lot of their rehab is very similar. And so that's been a really, really interesting thing for me, because I've gained a lot of clients that we never worked with before because they needed to go through shoulder rehab very similarly to a hockey player. Now, they might not get overhead and they might not need the range of motion necessarily that a baseball player needs, but they need a functioning rotator cuff. So a lot of those injuries come from collisions and high speed contact that they have. So I would say that in my career, the hockey players have benefited from the baseball background that we have within our company and within the history that I've had. So that's how the relationship has been come. Now, if you take it to a sport, being able to shoot a puck and having the ability to rotate their torso and move their trunk, there's a lot of crossover there too, because in hockey, because of the multi-directionalness of the sport, being able to maneuver their torso like a baseball player helps them change direction. So being on a skate, they almost have to turn their foot 90 degrees to the direction that they want to move. And that's something where they have to manipulate their upper body to be able to do that well. And that crossover has been a big thing. So hockey and baseball, they're played on different surface, different temperature, different stick implements, are very, very related. I would say the only thing that's relatively different is their arm moving above their head. And really the sprint factor, although there's a lot of crossover with their ability to sprint in hockey. Their feet may be a little bit abducted and their hip might be a little bit more abducted, but generally speaking, we love training sprints inside of hockey as much as I do baseball, if not more.
One other possible disconnect I think a lot of people would see, at least on the surface, between baseball and hockey would be the cardiovascular requirements. How are you addressing that in the training space?
It's interesting because as the pitch clock has become a thing, we've gone to a little bit more conditioning level, particularly with pitchers. Now, it wouldn't be, our bouts are very much way shorter, but maybe more reps over time. So when we're training some of our pitchers, we're looking at quick 3-4 second bouts, 15, 20 seconds off and done over 15 reps. We'll call them innings, things like that. And then repeated it after a rest period. In hockey, our durations could be, in hockey, it's interesting because people would think that it's like 45 seconds on and then their shift is off. They're actually much smaller than that. There might be an 8 second followed by an 8 second float, followed by an 8 second on, followed by an 8 second float, followed by an 8 second on, which actually reflects a little bit more closer to what a baseball bout would be because they're not necessarily propelling themselves at full go on skates the entire time that they're out there. Now, I will tell you that there are guys that have better motors than other guys. There's no doubt about that. But that kind of like 8 on, 8 off, 8 on, 8 off, 8 on, 8 off next shift is kind of really more so towards what baseball guys do, like, 4 seconds on, 15 seconds off, 4 seconds on, 15 seconds off. And it lends itself a little bit more to that modeling. The baseball guys don't do nearly as much in between. We'll call it that rest period, but they're a little bit closer, more related than you would think just looking at it, I would say. So there's definitely some cross related training that we've done. I'll do bike training, aerodyne bike training with our baseball players because maybe we don't want them to have as many foot contacts. Maybe they exceeded their foot contact that they needed for their sprints for that week. We'll do a lot of off ice training on our bike, rowing machine, things like that, in addition to sled drags and sled sprints, things of that nature too.
Yeah, I find that area very interesting. Someone we've been fortunate enough to grow close to kind of over the past year is the head baseball strength coach at LSU, Chris Martin. And Chris Martin is a huge proponent of developing cardiovascular fitness for baseball players in general. That's probably his passion project right now more than anything else. Is earlier we were talking about that pendulum swing of sports specificity. And for him, one of those that he's really trying to address is like, oh, baseball players don't need this cardiovascular base because the sport is so ballistic in nature. His take is not that it is a cardiovascular based sport, but if we have a greater cardiovascular base, we might be able to see faster recovery times in athletes, and we will just have overall better baseline fitness and I guess sport expression for an athlete if they're able to handle
I want
greater
to.
cardiovascular stimulus.
Oh man, a couple of years ago, we were on this when the pitch clock first came in. I think we had even a year or two before that, there were starting to be some spring training / minor league coaches that were, I don't know, they were doing some studies that were on what their average heart rate was for pitchers. And I think it was like 187 beats per minute or something like that, during an inning. And like, to me, that threw up a flag right away. Like, there is a cardiovascular component to what they're doing. And when the pitch clock came in, I mean, how many guys fell out immediately that couldn't keep up with the pace that the game now created? And to me, like, I thought there was going to be major kickback. To me, as an on watcher, somebody that, I think that the pitch clock was one of the best things that ever came in, but it has created some things that needed to be addressed. There is contribution to some of these, we'll call it setbacks or injuries that these guys are going through because they aren't recovering as well between ballistic events, which is basically you're trying to throw the ball as hard as you can every single rep, and you've got to do it on a 15, 18, 20-second repeat mode, which wasn't the case before the pitch clock. So 100%, that is a contributing factor and something that we've definitely implemented into our programming that I think a lot of people are doing a good job of. I think there needs to definitely be more. We got to consider more as we progress forward with these guys, especially if they're throwing harder and harder and harder, and it never stops. I mean, who knows what it's going to be? Personally, I don't think they need to throw that much harder. I mean, everybody's going to race to the top, but like, guys are at this point, like, how hard is hard enough? That's a question I have.
Well, I guess that will always be defined by a hitter's ability to hit the ball. So either more movement or just throw it harder and get it by the bat. But
Yeah.
time will only tell, as you said, how hard is hard enough. But Joe, there's no question we've been at this for a while. We've hit a ton of topics, and I've really liked the direction of conversation today. Before I do let you go, normally I would say, is there anything else you feel we didn't cover? I know before we started, I wanted to talk very quickly, at least about your kind of new mission to get out there and speak and be part of the education circuit. So I will steal your answer to, is there anything else we didn't cover, to I know what we didn't cover, which is kind of your new passion to get out and help the industry advance. So I'd love if you could touch on that for a little bit. I don't even know what the real question is, other
Yeah.
than what's the motivation and what is it that you really feel you're well positioned to share?
Yeah, I mean, over my career, I have the interesting perspective of both being in the weight room with a lot of athletes who have been their evolution of their career over time. I've seen before they were nobody and now they're somebody, right? And I've not only have I been in the weight room with them, but I've kind of transgressed the whole throwing perspective too. So I've gotten to see this modeling. I'm from both ends of the spectrum, both a skill perspective and the strength perspective, right? And so I think it's given me a really interesting view on how I think things should go. And I think where I kind of now stand is I can give a lot of people the experiences that I've had. And I think I have something to say. For a long time, I felt like I didn't have a lot of things to say because I didn't have the natural background that a lot of these coaches in our industry have, seeing a lot of careers and being part of a lot of homegrown careers and many homegrown careers. It's kind of given me that perspective to get out there. And I've been trying to get out to not only local coaches, but on the national circuit and talk about these experiences that I've gone through. So, that's my new mission, and really putting together the perspective of like, look, we need to look at what is happening out on the field and really lending our programming and our modeling to what's happening out on the field, not just trying to push people into back squats good for them and single leg split squats good for them. And this is because it looks like that gross movement, that's what they should be doing. I think it lends to the person and what that person is going through and how we need to be designing programs specifically to the athletes that we're addressing and how they decide to move on the field, which might be a little bit different than how they decide to move in the weight room, and then combining those two. So that's my movement, is based on moments instead of just general movement.
I think it's kind of the perfect tie of the knot to the podcast that we just put out there, because it really does address everything we discussed today, taking into consideration the development cycle of the athlete, everything that you said, taking nobodies to somebodies, whether that is through good programming or just these guys had something that was untapped, and for whatever reason in your work with them you guys have been able to identify it. But that really does come from getting people to believe in the athlete in front of them and not just having the most impressive programming or the most impressive system. It's creating something that works for the individual. So I appreciate you sharing that, Joe. And really, with that, I'd like to say I appreciate you for all your time today and what you've been able to share, and tolerating going through that last answer with my daughter here. I don't know if she provided much of a distraction, but for all the public speaking you're doing, you're probably used to weird things going on in the audience. I can tell you this would have sent me over the edge. But I appreciate you dealing with us. Joe, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, best way is you can catch me on Instagram at Joe Neal 2. Email anytime, joe@2spsports.com. That's an easy way to get a hold of me. I'm always available. I love talking to people, talking shop with coaches and athletes and players and things like that. So if I can ever be of help, I'm happy to lend that for sure.
Perfect. Now I'll actually do the outro. So once again, Joe, thank you. And to the audience, thanks for laying back with us.